On the morning of November 3, 2022, the small town of Millbrook was forever changed. The body of Melody Wilson, a beloved soprano in the First Light Baptist Church choir, was discovered partially concealed by fallen leaves in the woods behind Riverdale Park. A jogger stumbled upon the grim scene shortly after dawn, immediately alerting authorities. The medical examiner would later determine the cause of death to be blunt force trauma to the head, delivered with such force that it suggested not just an intent to harm, but to destroy. As news of the murder spread through the tight-knit community, shock gave way to disbelief, then to a gnawing fear. Violent crime was virtually unknown in Millbrook, a town of just under 12,000 residents where many still left their doors unlocked at night. Few could have imagined that within days the investigation would lead directly to the church's charismatic leader, Pastor Daniel Green. A man who had spent 20 years cultivating an image of moral authority and compassion. The case would ultimately expose a complex web of deception, forbidden romance, and fatal desperation that had been hiding beneath the surface of Millbrook's seemingly idyllic community. It would force the town to confront uncomfortable truths about identity, acceptance, and the dangers of placing religious leaders beyond reproach. First Light Baptist Church stood as the geographical and spiritual center of Millbrook. The historic red brick building with its distinctive white steeple had been a fixture in the town for over a century. Under Pastor Daniel Green's leadership, it had transformed from a struggling congregation to a thriving community hub with over 300 regular attendees. At 47, Daniel Green was the very image of a successful religious leader. Tall and dignified with prematurely silver hair, he projected an aura of wisdom and authority that served him well in the pulpit. His sermons, delivered with passion and conviction, often focused on themes of moral purity, family values, and the importance of living an authentic Christian life. The pastor's family completed this picture of Christian perfection. His wife, Rebecca, a quiet, supportive woman who ran the church's community outreach programs, was known for her gentle demeanor and unwavering support of her husband's ministry. Their 2 children, both away at college on academic scholarships, were frequently mentioned in his sermons as examples of godly young people navigating the challenges of modern society. Church records and interviews with parishioners painted a picture of a man dedicated to his calling. Pastor Green counseled couples in crisis, visited the sick, and maintained an open-door policy for anyone needing spiritual guidance. His apparent dedication to his flock only made the revelations that would follow all the more devastating. Melody Wilson had arrived in Millbrook just 18 months before her death, quickly establishing herself as an integral part of the church community. At 34, she made an immediate impression with her extraordinary soprano voice and warm personality. Within weeks of her arrival, she had joined the church choir and soon became a featured soloist. Professionally, Melody worked as a remote graphic designer for a Chicago-based marketing firm, a position that allowed her the flexibility to deeply involve herself in church activities. She lived alone in a modest apartment above the town's only bookstore and was known for her volunteer work with the church's youth music program. What no one in Millbrook knew was that Melody Wilson had been born Michael Wilson in Seattle, Washington. According to records that would later be uncovered by investigators, she had completed her transition 8 years earlier, legally changing her name and gender markers. Her move to Millbrook represented a fresh start, an opportunity to live authentically without the burden of explanation or justification. Friends from Seattle, interviewed after her death, described Melody as someone who had found peace with her identity after years of struggle. Her transition had cost her relationships with conservative family members, but she had built a supportive community in Seattle. Her decision to move to a small town in another state had surprised many of those friends, who worried about her safety and acceptance in a more conservative environment. The relationship between Pastor Green and Melody Wilson began innocuously enough. Church records showed that Melody had scheduled several meetings with the pastor in her first months at First Light, ostensibly to discuss her role in the music ministry. These meetings, initially held in the pastor's office during regular church hours, were unremarkable in a congregation where Green was known for his hands-on leadership approach. By spring 2022, however, patterns began to emerge that would later raise red flags for investigators. Security footage from local businesses showed Pastor Green and Melody meeting at a cafe in neighboring Westfield, 15 miles from Millbrook. Credit card records confirmed that these meetings occurred with increasing frequency between March and October 2022. The pastor's cell phone records, obtained via warrant after his arrest, revealed hundreds of text messages exchanged with Melody's number during this period. The content of these messages painted a picture of a relationship that had rapidly evolved from professional to deeply personal, then romantic. Electronic records and witness statements would later establish that by June 2022, Pastor Green and Melody Wilson were engaged in a full-fledged affair. Hotel receipts showed overnight stays in nearby cities, always paid in cash but linked to the pastor's credit card through reward program records. The affair represented a stunning contradiction to the public persona Green had cultivated. In Sunday sermons throughout this period, church records showed that he had spoken passionately against moral compromise and the dangers of secret sin. One sermon from July 2022, recorded for the church's website, included the line, "Our secrets have power over us only when we choose darkness over light." Rebecca Green, interviewed after her husband's arrest, maintained that she had no suspicion of his infidelity. The pastor's schedule had always been demanding, with evening meetings and counseling sessions a regular part of his ministerial duties. His absences, even overnight ones explained as religious conferences or retreats, had never struck her as unusual. Throughout the summer and early fall of 2022, the affair continued with increasing intensity. Financial records showed Green withdrawing larger sums of cash, presumably to finance their clandestine meetings, without leaving an electronic trail. Melody's personal journal, recovered from her apartment after her death, revealed a woman falling deeply in love but increasingly troubled by the deception their relationship required. On October 12, 2022, everything changed. According to the investigation that followed, Pastor Green discovered Melody's transgender identity through a chance encounter that would set in motion the events leading to her death. A new parishioner, Sandra Mills, had recently moved to Millbrook from Seattle. During a church potluck dinner, she recognized Melody from a transgender support group they had both attended years earlier in Washington state. Church security cameras captured Mills approaching Green after the event, engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation. Phone records showed that Green called Melody immediately after this interaction, a call that lasted just over 3 minutes. That same evening, security footage from the Westfield Inn showed both Green and Melody arriving separately and entering the same room. They remained there for over 2 hours. The content of their conversation was never directly recorded, but the aftermath was evident in subsequent communications. Text messages recovered from Melody's phone showed a dramatic shift in tone from both parties. Green's messages became erratic, alternating between expressions of continued affection and accusations of deception. Melody's responses revealed her attempts to explain her past and reassure Green that her identity didn't change who she was or what they had shared. In the 2 weeks that followed this revelation, electronic records painted a picture of a relationship in rapid deterioration. Green canceled choir rehearsals twice, something he had never done before, according to church records. Witnesses reported seeing Melody attempting to speak with him after Sunday services, only to be rebuffed. The pastor's journal, later discovered hidden in his home office, revealed a man in profound crisis. Entries from this period showed increasing paranoia about exposure, not just of the affair but of his involvement with a transgender woman. One entry read, "What would the congregation think? Everything I've built, everything I've taught, it would all be seen as hypocrisy of the highest order." On October 27th, a week before her death, Melody's tone in text messages changed dramatically. After multiple attempts to meet with Pastor Green were ignored, she grew increasingly frustrated. Financial records showed her withdrawing a significant sum from her savings account, and browser history on her laptop revealed searches for apartments in other cities. The final text message from Melody to Green, sent on October 28, contained what investigators would later characterize as an ultimatum. She indicated that she planned to speak with church leadership about the pastor's behavior if he continued to avoid her. While not explicitly threatening to reveal their affair or her transgender status, the message clearly implied that she was no longer willing to be silenced or ignored. This message received no written response. However, cell phone records showed that Green called Melody less than 5 minutes after receiving it. The call lasted just over 3 minutes. That same evening, Melody's apartment building security cameras captured her leaving around 8 p.m. According to the building manager, she mentioned meeting someone to resolve a difficult situation. She never returned. The discovery of Melody Wilson's body on the morning of November 3 launched an investigation that initially seemed to have few leads. The location, a wooded area behind Riverdale Park, was secluded but accessible. The medical examiner's report determined that death had occurred between 9 p.m. and midnight on November 2, caused by multiple blunt force trauma wounds to the head. The crime scene revealed signs of a struggle. disturbed ground, broken branches, and defensive wounds on Melody's arms and hands. A large rock, found near the body and covered in the victim's blood, was identified as the murder weapon. Partial fingerprints on the rock were too smudged for identification, and rain in the early morning hours had washed away many potential forensic clues. In the initial days of the investigation, detectives focused on standard procedures. Interviewing Melody's neighbors, colleagues, and fellow church members, Pastor Green was among those interviewed, expressing shock and grief at the loss of a valued choir member. He offered a detailed account of his whereabouts on the night of November 2, claiming to have been at home preparing the coming Sunday's sermon. The case took a dramatic turn on November 8th, when Sandra Mills came forward with information about Melody's transgender identity and her suspicions about a relationship between Melody and Pastor Green. Mills explained her reluctance to come forward earlier, citing concerns about posthumously outing Melody without consent. However, her growing unease about the timing of Melody's death, so soon after the pastor learned of her transgender status, ultimately compelled her to speak with investigators. Armed with this new information, detectives began examining the pastor's movements more closely. His cell phone records placed him near Riverdale Park at 9:12 p.m. on November 2, directly contradicting his statement about being home all evening. Furthermore, security footage from a gas station half a mile from the park showed his distinctive silver SUV passing by at 8:57 p.m. A search warrant for Green's home and office, executed on November 10, yielded crucial evidence. Behind a false panel in his desk, investigators discovered a journal containing entries about his relationship with Melody, his discovery of her transgender identity, and his growing fear of exposure. The most incriminating entry, dated November 2, detailed his intention to meet Melody that night and his fear that she would reveal information that would destroy his family and career. Forensic analysis of the pastor's vehicle revealed traces of soil matching the crime scene location, as well as a small blood stain on the driver's side floor mat that DNA testing would later confirm belonged to Melody Wilson. On November 11th, faced with mounting evidence, Pastor Daniel Green confessed to the murder of Melody Wilson. His formal statement, recorded at the Millbrook Police Department, revealed the extent of their relationship and the events leading to her death. According to Green's confession, he had arranged to meet Melody at Riverdale Park on the night of November 2, hoping to convince her to leave town quietly. He brought a substantial amount of cash, offering it as relocation assistance. When Melody refused the money and insisted on remaining in Millbrook, stating that she had done nothing wrong and had no reason to leave, the conversation escalated. Green admitted that when Melody threatened to reveal their relationship to church leadership, he panicked. He struck her with a rock in what he claimed was an impulsive act of desperation. When she fell, he continued striking her until she stopped moving. He then made a minimal attempt to conceal the body before fleeing the scene. The pastor's confession revealed a man who had prioritized his reputation and position above all else. He expressed remorse not primarily for taking a life, but for the damage his actions would cause to his family and congregation. This callousness would later be noted by the judge during sentencing. Pastor Daniel Green's trial began on April 15, 2023. Despite his confession, he entered a plea of not guilty to first-degree murder, with his defense team arguing for a charge of manslaughter. They claimed that Green had acted in the heat of passion after being threatened with exposure that would destroy his life's work. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Caroline Jimenez, presented a compelling case of murder motivated by fear of exposure. They argued that Green's actions showed clear premeditation, from arranging the meeting in a secluded location to bringing cash as a potential bribe. The journal entry from November 2 further substantiated their claim that Green had at least considered the possibility of violence before the meeting. The trial lasted 3 weeks, during which the community of Millbrook was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about a man many had trusted implicitly. Church members packed the courtroom each day, many struggling to reconcile the compassionate spiritual leader they had known with the calculating killer revealed through testimony and evidence. On May 3, after deliberating for just 5 hours, the jury found Daniel Green guilty of second-degree murder. On June 17, Judge Michael Harrington sentenced him to 25 years in prison, noting that the breach of trust involved in the crime warranted a sentence at the upper end of the guidelines. The revelation of Pastor Green's double life and his crime devastated the Millbrook community. First Light Baptist Church experienced a crisis of faith and leadership. Attendance dropped dramatically in the months following the arrest, with many longtime members unable to return to a building now associated with such profound deception. The church underwent a painful period of reflection and healing. Interim leadership organized services dedicated to discussing integrity, acceptance, and the dangers of placing religious leaders beyond accountability. Counseling was made available to congregation members struggling to process the betrayal. Sandra Mills, whose recognition of Melody had inadvertently set the tragedy in motion, established a support group for LGBTQ individuals in the community. The group, named Melody's Voice, aimed to create a safe space for discussion and advocacy in a town that had been forced to confront its biases in the most tragic way possible. 1 year after Melody Wilson's death, the First Light Baptist Church unveiled a memorial garden behind the building. At its center stands a small bronze statue of a woman with her arms raised, as if in song. The plaque reads simply, "In memory of Melody Wilson, whose voice touched our hearts. May we strive to create a world where everyone can live their truth without fear." From his prison cell, Daniel Green declined all interview requests. His wife Rebecca filed for divorce shortly after his conviction and moved away from Millbrook with their children. Church attendance has slowly begun to recover under new leadership that has emphasized transparency, accountability, and inclusivity. Detective Lauren Reeves, who led the investigation, offers perhaps the most sobering reflection on the case. What happened to Melody Wilson represents the devastating consequences when religious authority is used as a shield for deception. Pastor Green's position created a blind spot in a community that believed itself to be observant and discerning. The tragedy is that Melody died not because of who she was, but because of who Green feared he would be revealed to be. The case of Pastor Daniel Green and Melody Wilson has become a cautionary tale about the dangers of placing anyone, especially religious leaders, above scrutiny. It stands as a painful reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats to a community come not from outside, but from those entrusted with its care and guidance. But this second story is so much more disturbing than this. On Christmas Eve, 2021, the peaceful lakeside community of Pine Haven was shattered by an unthinkable tragedy. The body of Avery Chen, a talented musician and beloved member of the Grace Covenant Church Choir, was discovered in the church's bell tower just hours before the midnight service. Initial reports suggested a tragic accident, a fall from the tower's narrow staircase, but the investigation would soon reveal something far more sinister. No one suspected that Reverend Jonathan Carter, Pine Haven's most respected spiritual leader and community advocate for over 15 years, could be connected to such violence. His impassioned eulogy at Avery's memorial service moved the congregation to tears. Yet within weeks, evidence would emerge linking him directly to Avery's death, exposing a web of deception, forbidden romance, and desperate self-preservation that had festered beneath his pious exterior. As Detective Marcus Donovan would later observe, this case demonstrates how the desire to protect one's reputation can transform even the most outwardly virtuous person into someone capable of the ultimate betrayal. Grace Covenant Church stood as the crown jewel of Pine Haven, its Gothic stone architecture and stained glass windows overlooking the shores of Lake Serene. The church had been established in 1892, but it was under Reverend Jonathan Carter's leadership that it had experienced unprecedented growth and community impact. At 52, Reverend Carter was the embodiment of charismatic religious leadership. His distinguished appearance, tall with salt and pepper hair and penetrating blue eyes, commanded attention, while his sermons, combining intellectual depth with emotional resonance, attracted congregants from surrounding communities. Under his guidance, Grace Covenant had expanded its ministries to include an acclaimed music program, a community food bank serving 3 counties, and a seasonal shelter for the homeless. Carter was married to Elizabeth, a clinical psychologist who maintained her own practice while actively supporting church initiatives. Their 2 adult daughters had followed their parents into helping professions, one as a pediatric nurse, the other as a social worker. The family presented an image of devoted service and moral clarity that earned them universal respect in Pine Haven. The church's music ministry had become particularly renowned during Carter's tenure. The choir performed throughout the region and had released 2 albums of sacred music. Reverend Carter himself was known to have a fine baritone voice and occasionally joined special performances, particularly during Christmas and Easter services. Avery Chen had arrived in Pine Haven just 14 months before their death. At 29, they had already built an impressive resume as a classically trained vocalist with a master's degree from the prestigious Eastman School of Music. Avery had accepted a position teaching music at Pine Haven Community College while pursuing doctoral studies online through the University of Michigan. What few people in Pinehaven knew was that Avery Chen was transgender and non-binary, using they/them pronouns among close friends. Having transitioned several years earlier while studying in New York, Avery had legally changed their name and gender markers. Upon moving to the more conservative environment of Pinehaven, they had made the personal decision to present more traditionally in line with their birth gender, to avoid potential complications in their new position. According to friends from graduate school who were later interviewed by investigators, Avery had expressed some anxiety about moving to a smaller community. They weren't hiding who they were out of shame, explained former roommate Riley Johnson. Avery was just pragmatic about the challenges they might face. They wanted to establish themselves professionally first, then gradually become more open about their identity once they had built relationships and trust. Avery joined the Grace Covenant Choir within 2 months of arriving in Pinehaven, quickly becoming a featured soloist due to their exceptional vocal range and technical skill. Church records showed that they participated in weekly rehearsals and frequently volunteered for additional musical projects, including a children's choir workshop and special community performances. The relationship between Reverend Carter and Avery Chen began as a natural connection between a church leader and a talented new addition to the music ministry. Early interactions, documented in church newsletters and social media posts, showed Carter publicly praising Avery's contributions to the choir and welcoming their musical expertise. By spring 2021, church records indicated that Avery had become increasingly involved in planning music for services, meeting regularly with Reverend Carter and the music director Elaine Winters. These meetings, initially conducted in the church office during regular hours, were standard procedure for the well-organized ministry. Security footage from various locations around Pinehaven, later reviewed by investigators, showed Carter and Avery beginning to meet outside of church contexts in May 2021. They were seen at the local university library, at a cafe near the lake, and walking together in Riverside Park. While not inherently suspicious, the frequency of these meetings, at least twice weekly by June, would later raise questions about the nature of their relationship. The summer of 2021 marked a shift in the relationship between Reverend Carter and Avery Chen. Church staff later reported noticing changes in their interactions during rehearsals and services, more frequent eye contact, private conversations, and what the church secretary described as a tangible energy between them. Financial records obtained during the investigation revealed that Carter had begun making cash withdrawals of varying amounts, typically between $200 and $500 on a regular basis, starting in July. No clear explanation for these withdrawals was ever provided, though hotel receipts later discovered in Carter's home office suggested these funds may have financed overnight stays in neighboring cities. Elizabeth Carter, interviewed after her husband's arrest, maintained that she had noticed no changes in his behavior during this period. As a psychologist with an active practice, her own schedule was demanding, and the couple had long operated with considerable independence. She noted that Jonathan had always worked long hours, and his involvement with various church ministries had frequently taken him away from home. The church music director, Elaine Winters, would later tell investigators that by late summer, she had begun to feel deliberately excluded from planning meetings between Carter and Avery. They developed their own shorthand, she recalled. They seemed to communicate on a level that didn't require or welcome outside input. I started receiving completed music selections rather than being part of the selection process. On November 12, 2021, according to records later uncovered, Reverend Carter discovered Avery's transgender identity through an unexpected channel. A church conference in Minneapolis brought Carter into contact with a visiting music director from New York who had attended Eastman during Avery's time there. During a conversation about talented musicians, the director mentioned knowing Avery Chen when they were early in their transition and spoke admiringly of their courage. Carter's cell phone records showed that he called Avery immediately upon returning to his hotel room that evening, a call that lasted over 40 minutes. The content of this conversation was never recorded, but subsequent communications suggested a significant shift in their relationship. Over the following week, electronic records showed a flurry of text messages between Carter's and Avery's numbers, more than 60 exchanges in 7 days. Fragments recovered from Avery's damaged phone after their death revealed messages alternating between reassurances that nothing had changed and expressions of anxiety about potential consequences if others discovered their relationship. Security footage from the parking lot of the Lakeview Inn, a small hotel 10 miles outside Pinehaven, showed Carter and Avery arriving separately on November 19. They remained in the same room for over 3 hours. The hotel manager, when interviewed, recalled seeing them emerge looking visibly distressed, with Carter leaving first and Avery following several minutes later. In the weeks following the revelation of Avery's transgender identity, multiple witnesses reported observing tension between Carter and Avery during choir rehearsals. The church administrator noted that Carter had canceled 2 scheduled meetings with Avery, something unprecedented in their previously close working relationship. College colleagues reported that Avery appeared increasingly withdrawn during late November and early December. One fellow faculty member recalled Avery declining an invitation to a holiday gathering, explaining that they were dealing with a complicated personal situation that was consuming their energy. Carter's sermon notes from this period, later recovered from his computer, showed a striking shift in themes. His planned series on living in truth was abruptly replaced with messages focusing on God's grace in human weakness and redemption through crisis. The final sermon he delivered before Avery's death centered on the text, "What profit is it to gain the whole world but lose one's soul?" a passage that would take on disturbing significance in light of subsequent events. But then, the world had waged war on this world. On December 20, just 4 days before the murder, Avery met with their department chair at the community college to discuss the possibility of a leave of absence for the coming semester. The chair later reported that Avery had appeared distressed, but determined, mentioning the need to resolve a situation that had become untenable. That same evening, Avery withdrew $5,000 from their savings account and made an online inquiry about short-term rental properties in Seattle. Their browser history showed searches for legal name change reversal and transgender discrimination in employment. The events of December 24, 2021 were reconstructed through security footage, electronic records, and witness statements. Avery arrived at Grace Covenant Church at 4:30 p.m. for the final rehearsal before the midnight service. Multiple choir members later confirmed that both Avery and Reverend Carter appeared tense during the rehearsal, avoiding direct interaction. At 7:15 p.m., security cameras showed Carter receiving a text message and immediately leaving the sanctuary. 3 minutes later, Avery also received a text and followed in the same direction. Neither the content of these messages nor who sent them was ever conclusively determined, as both individuals' phones showed message deletions from this critical period. Church custodian Henry Willis reported seeing Avery heading toward the bell tower staircase around 7:25 p.m., which struck him as unusual since the tower was generally off-limits except to maintenance staff. When questioned about whether he had seen Reverend Carter in the same area, Willis initially said no, but later amended his statement, acknowledging that he had been vacuuming and might not have noticed someone else in the hallway. Between 7:25 p.m. and 8:10 p.m., neither Carter nor Avery appeared on any security footage. At 8:12 p.m., Carter emerged alone from the tower staircase entrance, adjusting his clerical collar and quickly walking to his office. Security cameras showed him washing his hands thoroughly in the office bathroom and changing into a fresh shirt he took from a drawer in his desk, a detail that would later prove crucial to the investigation. At 8:30 p.m., Carter calmly participated in a pre-service prayer meeting with church elders, making no mention of Avery's absence. When the choir director expressed concern at 9:15 p.m. that Avery had not returned for final preparations, Carter suggested they might have gone home briefly due to feeling unwell. At 10:47 p.m., a volunteer searching for extension cords in the storage area near the bell tower heard what she described as a soft moaning from the stairwell. Investigating the sound, she discovered Avery's body on the landing halfway up the tower steps. Despite immediate medical attention from a nurse in the congregation, Avery was pronounced dead when paramedics arrived at 11:12 p.m. Initial assessments suggested an accidental fall, as the tower stairs were steep and poorly lit. However, the medical examiner's subsequent investigation revealed injuries inconsistent with a simple fall. Avery had suffered blunt force trauma to the back of the head, delivered with significant force before the fall occurred. Additionally, bruising patterns on their arms indicated they had been forcefully restrained. Most damning was the discovery of torn fabric caught in Avery's watch band, fabric that matched the shirt Carter had been wearing earlier in the evening, which investigators later found hidden behind books in his office credenza. In the immediate aftermath of Avery's death, Reverend Carter presented a picture of appropriate pastoral grief. He canceled the midnight service, led the congregation in prayer for Avery's family, and coordinated support efforts. He gave a detailed statement to police describing his movements that evening, claiming he had been in meetings in preparation for the service during the critical time period. The initial investigation proceeded along standard lines for what appeared to be an accidental death, focusing on the structural safety of the tower staircase and whether Avery had any medical conditions that might have caused them to lose balance. However, several factors soon complicated this narrative. First, the medical examiner's report, completed on December 27, conclusively ruled Avery's death a homicide based on the nature of the head trauma and defensive wounds on their arms. Second, a thorough review of the church's security footage revealed the suspicious timing of Carter's and Avery's movements. Finally, lab analysis confirmed that the fabric in Avery's watch band matched Carter's discarded shirt. With these developments, Detective Marcus Donovan intensified the investigation, obtaining warrants for electronic records and conducting more detailed interviews with church staff and choir members. These efforts revealed the extent of Carter's relationship with Avery and the potential motive for violence. A search of Carter's home office conducted on December 30 uncovered a hidden journal containing entries about his growing attachment to Avery, his discovery of their transgender identity, and his fear of exposure. The most incriminating entry, dated December 22, read, "A is threatening to make everything public. Says if I won't acknowledge our relationship openly, they'll force the issue. Doesn't understand what this would do to my family, my ministry, everything I've built. Meeting Thursday to make one final appeal for discretion." Electronic records painted an even more damning picture. Despite careful deletion of text messages from both phones, cloud backup recovery revealed an exchange from December 23rd. "Avery, I'm tired of hiding who I am. Either you accept me publicly for who I am or I need to move somewhere I can live authentically. That includes being honest about us. Carter, you know that's impossible. Think about what you're threatening to destroy, not just for me, but for an entire community that depends on this church. Avery, I've made my decision. After the Christmas service, I'm going to speak with Elizabeth. She deserves to know, and I deserve to live without secrets." This final message, sent less than 24 hours before Avery's death, established both motive and premeditation. On January 5, 2022, faced with mounting evidence, Reverend Jonathan Carter confessed to killing Avery Chen. According to his statement, he had arranged to meet Avery in the bell tower before the service, ostensibly to reach a compromise. When Avery remained resolute in their intention to reveal both their transgender identity and their relationship with Carter, the Reverend struck them from behind with a heavy flashlight kept in the tower for maintenance purposes. Carter's account described a momentary loss of control rather than premeditated murder. However, his actions following the assault, staging the scene as an accident, changing his clothes, and continuing with church activities while Avery potentially lay dying, suggested a calculated attempt to conceal his crime. The trial began on June 7, 2022. Despite his confession, Carter entered a plea of not guilty to first-degree murder, with his defense team arguing for a charge of voluntary manslaughter based on extreme emotional disturbance. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Veronica Hayes, presented a compelling case of murder motivated by fear of personal and professional ruin. On June 28, after deliberating for 14 hours, the jury found Jonathan Carter guilty of second-degree murder. On August 15, Judge Raymond Mitchell sentenced him to 22 years in prison, noting that the breach of trust and calculated cover-up warranted a sentence near the maximum guidelines. The revelation of Reverend Carter's crime devastated the Pine Haven community. Grace Covenant Church experienced profound trauma, with attendance dropping by nearly 60% in the months following the arrest. The church board appointed an interim pastor and established a crisis response team to support congregation members struggling to process the betrayal. Elizabeth Carter filed for divorce within weeks of her husband's confession. In a brief public statement, she expressed her profound sorrow for Avery's family and requested privacy as she and her daughters grappled with the destruction of the life they had known. The case sparked important conversations in Pine Haven about inclusion, religious authority, and the harm caused by expectations of conformity. The community college established the Avery Chen Memorial Scholarship for LGBTQ students in music and performing arts, a support group for LGBTQ individuals in rural communities, named Avery's Authentic Voice, was founded by several of Avery's colleagues. 1 year after Avery Chen's death, Grace Covenant Church held a memorial service that doubled as a commitment to transformation. The newly hired permanent pastor, Reverend Sophia Washington, dedicated a meditation garden where the congregation could reflect on the painful lessons of the past while looking toward a more inclusive future. The bell tower where Avery died was renovated and repurposed as a music practice space named in their honor. A plaque at the entrance bears the words, "In memory of Avery Chin," whose voice reminded us of the divine harmony possible when we embrace the authentic song within each person. From prison, Jonathan Carter declined all interview requests and issued no public statements. According to corrections officials, he requested and received permission to lead a small Bible study for fellow inmates. On the morning of April 17, 2023, residents of the upscale Oakwood Terrace neighborhood in Portland, Oregon awoke to the sounds of sirens. Yellow police tape cordoned off the elegant Tudor-style home at 1428 Pinehurst Drive, where 42-year-old Marcus Wilcox, a respected investment banker, had been found dead in his home office. The call to emergency services had come from his wife of 7 years, Elena Wilcox, who claimed to have discovered her husband's body after returning from an overnight stay with her sister. What initially appeared to be a home invasion gone wrong would soon unravel into something far more complex. A tale of secrets, betrayal, and a digital footprint that would ultimately lead investigators to question everything about the seemingly perfect Wilcox marriage. According to neighbors and friends, Marcus and Elena Wilcox were the couple everyone envied. Their dinner parties were legendary, with Elena transforming their backyard into something worthy of a lifestyle magazine, while Marcus played the perfect host, ensuring everyone felt welcomed and valued. Their social media accounts showcased an enviable life of exotic vacations, elegant home renovations, and heartfelt anniversary celebrations. Marcus had built a solid reputation as a senior vice president at Pacific Northwest Financial, known for his integrity and business acumen. Elena, a graphic designer, had successfully launched her own branding agency 3 years prior and was admired for her creativity and professional drive. They appeared to have mastered the elusive work-life balance that so many couples struggle to achieve. What their social circle didn't see were the complicated layers beneath the surface of the Wilcoxes' marriage. Elena had transitioned shortly before meeting Marcus in 2014 at a charity fundraiser. Those closest to the couple noted that Marcus had been supportive from the beginning, often described by friends as Elena's biggest champion. At their wedding, he had moved guests to tears with a toast about how Elena had taught him what true courage meant. For the first 5 years of their marriage, the Wilcoxes were active members of their Portland community, particularly involved in charities supporting LGBTQ+ youth. Elena had become something of a local celebrity, speaking at events about her transition journey and using her and Marcus's relationship as an example of unconditional love and acceptance. But as detectives would soon discover, the Wilcox marriage had begun to change in subtle ways approximately 18 months before Marcus's death. The first sign of trouble appeared in the fall of 2021. According to Elena's statement to police, she had noticed Marcus becoming increasingly protective of his phone, taking it with him everywhere, even to the shower. If she approached while he was using it, he would immediately lock the screen or place it face down. Elena initially attributed this behavior to work stress. Pacific Northwest Financial was navigating a difficult merger, and Marcus was working longer hours than usual. By early 2022, other changes had emerged. Marcus joined a new gym, updated his wardrobe, and was spending more evenings at what he called client dinners that sometimes kept him out until the early hours of the morning. Detective Sarah Linden of the Portland Police Bureau later noted that these were classic warning signs, but ones that are easy to rationalize when you're in love with someone. According to Elena's testimony, everything changed on March 30, 2023. Marcus had left his laptop open when he went to shower before a business trip. Elena, looking for a document she needed for a client meeting, noticed a notification from an unfamiliar app. What she discovered would set in motion a chain of events that would end with Marcus dead less than 3 weeks later. The notification was from a dating app called Exclusive Connect, marketed to affluent professionals. Marcus's profile, active for approximately 9 months, described him as single, never married, and looking for the right woman to start a family with. His bio made no mention of Elena or his current marriage. Most disturbing to Elena was a section where users listed their relationship deal breakers. Marcus had listed transgender partners as his first deal breaker. In her statement, Elena described feeling as though she couldn't breathe upon seeing this information. 7 years of marriage, and he was presenting himself not just as single, but as someone who would categorically reject someone like her. It was like discovering that the person sleeping beside her was a complete stranger. What happened after Elena's discovery became the central question of the investigation. According to her initial statement, she confronted Marcus immediately, They had a heated argument, after which Marcus left for his business trip as planned. She claimed they spoke briefly by phone over the next 2 weeks, but had not resolved the issue. On the night of April 16, she decided to stay with her sister, Sofia Rivera, to clear her head and decide what to do about the marriage. Sofia corroborated this account, telling detectives that Elena had arrived at her apartment around 7:30 p.m. on April 16, visibly upset, but not disclosing the specific reason. The sisters had shared a bottle of wine and watched movies until falling asleep around midnight. According to Sofia, Elena left around 9 a.m. the next morning, saying she needed to talk to Marcus before he left for work. Elena told police that when she arrived home at approximately 9:30 a.m., she found the front door unlocked, which was unusual. Calling out for Marcus and receiving no response, she went to his home office, where she found him slumped over his desk with a single gunshot wound to the back of his head. The family's gun, normally kept in a safe in their bedroom closet, was on the floor beside him. In her recorded statement, Elena described screaming uncontrollably and being unable to process what she was seeing. She ran outside and called 911 from the driveway because she couldn't remain in the house with him in that condition. When first responders arrived at 9:47 a.m., they found Elena in the driveway, hyperventilating and unable to speak coherently. Marcus was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner would later determine the time of death to be between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. the previous night, when Elena was supposedly at her sister's apartment. The investigation took a decisive turn when detectives obtained security footage from the Wilcox's neighbor, retired security consultant Howard Reeves. Reeves had installed a comprehensive camera system following a series of break-ins in the neighborhood the previous year. His front-facing camera had a partial view of the Wilcox's driveway. The footage showed Elena's car leaving the residence at 6:45 p.m. on April 16, consistent with her statement about going to her sister's apartment. However, at 11:23 p.m., the same car returned to the driveway and remained there until 1:17 a.m. when it left again. This contradicted Elena's claim of spending the entire night at her sister's apartment. When confronted with this evidence, Sofia Rivera admitted to lying in her initial statement. Elena had called her that night and asked her to cover for her if anyone asked. Sofia didn't ask why, assuming it was related to the couple's marital troubles. Cell phone records further complicated Elena's narrative. While her phone had indeed pinged towers near her sister's apartment during the evening hours, it had been turned off between 10:30 p.m. and 2 a.m., the window during which Marcus was killed. The most damning evidence came from Marcus's laptop. Digital forensics revealed that in the hours before his death, Marcus had been messaging with a woman named Vanessa Chambers on the exclusive Connect app. In their exchange, Marcus had mentioned that he planned to tell his wife about everything the following day and that he wanted to end their marriage. His final message, sent at 10:38 p.m., expressed a desire to live honestly. As the evidence mounted against Elena, Detective Linden conducted a second, more intensive interview. After 5 hours of questioning, Elena's carefully constructed narrative began to unravel. She finally admitted to returning to the house, saying she needed to see the messages for herself and understand how long he had been living this double life. According to her new statement, she had gone back intending only to gather more evidence of Marcus's deception from his computer. She hadn't expected him to be home, believing he was staying overnight at a hotel for a business conference in Seattle. Elena described entering the house to find Marcus in his office, actively using the dating app. He hadn't heard her come in. She stood in the doorway watching him smile at his screen and type messages, which triggered something inside her to break. In her revised account, a confrontation quickly escalated. Marcus allegedly admitted not only to the dating profile, but to a series of relationships with other women over the previous year. He confessed that he had made a mistake in marrying her and had been looking for a way out for months. Elena claimed that Marcus told her he had only married her because it made him look progressive and open-minded to his colleagues. He reportedly said their whole relationship had been about his image rather than love, and that he wanted a real wife who could give him children. In this new version of events, Marcus had become increasingly cruel during their argument, mocking her transition and telling her that he had never truly seen her as a woman. At some point during the confrontation, Elena went to their bedroom and retrieved the gun from the safe. She told detectives she didn't remember consciously deciding to get the gun, describing the experience as watching herself from outside her body. She only remembered standing in the doorway of his office again, seeing him turn to look at her with an expression of contempt. Then came the sound, and he was gone. On June 5, 2023, Elena Wilcox was formally charged with second-degree murder. Her defense team immediately began preparing a case based on temporary insanity and emotional distress, citing the extreme psychological trauma of discovering her husband's betrayal and transphobic attitudes. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Margaret Fowler, characterized the killing as a premeditated murder motivated by rage and revenge. The prosecution argued that this was not a crime of passion but a calculated act. Elena had turned off her phone, created an alibi with her sister, returned to the house when she knew her husband would be vulnerable, and shot him while his back was turned. The trial began in November 2023 and quickly captured national attention. It raised complex questions about identity, betrayal, and the psychological impact of rejection based on one's gender identity. Expert witnesses testified about the unique vulnerabilities and traumas experienced by transgender individuals, particularly in intimate relationships. Rebecca Langer, a psychologist specializing in LGBTQ+ mental health, testified for the defense about the profound psychological crisis that can be triggered when a transgender person is rejected specifically because of their identity, particularly by someone who had previously claimed to accept them. She described it as a form of betrayal that attacks the very core of who they are. The prosecution countered with testimony from Marcus's friends and colleagues, who described him as increasingly unhappy in his marriage, but afraid to leave due to concerns about how it would be perceived. According to his best friend, Marcus felt trapped and believed he had made a mistake, but didn't know how to end the marriage without being labeled a bigot. Messages recovered from Marcus's dating app conversations revealed a man struggling with his identity and choices. In one exchange with a woman he had been seeing regularly, he admitted to making a decision 7 years ago that he thought made him a good person, but now realized he was using someone else's identity to feel better about himself. He concluded that they were both living lies. After a 3-week trial and 4 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty of voluntary manslaughter, a lesser charge than the second-degree murder the prosecution had sought. On January 12, 2024, Elena Wilcox was sentenced to 12 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 8 years. The Wilcox case continues to spark debate among legal experts, LGBTQ+ advocates, and relationship counselors. Some view Elena as a sympathetic figure pushed beyond her breaking point by a profound betrayal, while others maintain that no amount of personal rejection justifies taking another person's life. Media commentators describe the case as a tragedy with no heroes, a cautionary tale about authenticity, honesty, and the devastating consequences that can unfold when people enter relationships for the wrong reasons or fail to communicate their changing feelings. For the friends and family left behind, the case remains a painful mystery of how a seemingly perfect relationship could end so violently. Many found themselves reviewing every interaction with the couple, searching for signs they might have missed that could have indicated the depth of unhappiness on both sides. As Elena Wilcox began serving her sentence at the Mountain View Correctional Facility, the digital footprints that exposed Marcus's deception have been preserved as evidence in a case that will likely be studied by criminologists and psychologists for years to come. The dating profile that Marcus Wilcox created to escape his marriage ultimately became the first domino in a tragic sequence that would end his life and forever alter Elena's. In her only public statement following her sentencing, released through her attorney, Elena expressed that there was no justification for what she did. She acknowledged that a moment of unbearable pain led to an action she could never take back, destroying 2 lives that night, Marcus's and her own. She expressed hope that by sharing their story, others might find the courage to be honest with themselves and their partners before it's too late. The Wilcox home at 1428 Pinehurst Drive was sold 6 months after Marcus's death. The new owners have renovated extensively, perhaps in an attempt to erase the memory of what happened there. But in Portland's Oakwood Terrace neighborhood, residents still speak in hushed tones about the couple who seemed to have everything, until a secret dating profile revealed that their perfect life was nothing but a carefully constructed facade. But the next story shocked even most veteran investigators. On the morning of March 17, 2024, residents of the affluent Clayton Heights neighborhood in Seattle woke to the piercing wail of sirens. Emergency vehicles descended upon the modern glass and cedar home at 4721 Lakeside Drive, a property that had been featured in architectural magazines and belonged to tech executive Daniel Reynolds and his wife Sophia. By nightfall, news had spread that 42-year-old Daniel was dead and his wife of 7 years was in police custody. The community was stunned. The Reynolds were, by all outward appearances, the embodiment of progressive success, a power couple who hosted charity events, attended gallery openings, and seemed genuinely in love. No one could have predicted the layers of deception that existed behind their carefully curated lives, nor the violent end that awaited one of them. The story of Daniel and Sophia Reynolds began like many modern romances, online, through a dating app in 2015. Daniel, then a rising star at Northwest Innovations, had recently relocated to Seattle from San Francisco. Ambitious and charismatic, he quickly established himself in the tech community, known for his innovative thinking and networking prowess. Sophia Morgan, as she was known then, worked as a graphic designer for a boutique agency specializing in branding for tech startups. Talented and striking, with high cheekbones and expressive eyes, she had completed her transition 2 years before meeting Daniel. Friends described her as confident, yet private about her past, preferring to focus on her future and career. Their connection was immediate and intense. Within 6 months, they were living together, and after a year, Daniel proposed during a weekend trip to Vancouver. The wedding was an elegant affair at a vineyard overlooking Puget Sound, attended by Seattle's tech elite and creative professionals. For the first 5 years of their marriage, the Reynolds appeared to have achieved the perfect balance of career success and personal happiness. Daniel received a significant promotion to Director of Product Development, while Sophia launched her own design consultancy, which quickly gained prestigious clients. They purchased their Lakeside Drive home, renovated it to showcase Sophia's design aesthetic, and became fixtures in Seattle's social scene. Beneath this gleaming surface, however, fault lines were forming. The first sign of trouble appeared in late 2000, and 22 on Sophia noticed subtle changes in Daniel's behavior. Longer work hours, increased business travel, and a newfound guardedness with his phone and laptop. Initially, she attributed these changes to work stress, as Northwest Innovations was preparing to launch a major new platform. By early 2023, Sophia's suspicions had grown. Daniel had become emotionally distant, often distracted during conversations, and less interested in their once active sex life. A friend in their social circle mentioned seeing Daniel at a restaurant in Bellevue with an unknown woman, describing their body language as intimate. When confronted, Daniel dismissed it as a business meeting. The digital breadcrumbs began accumulating. Unfamiliar charges appeared on credit card statements for hotels in Seattle, odd for someone who lived in the city. Rideshare receipts showed trips to residential addresses during times Daniel claimed to be at work. Text notifications from unknown numbers would prompt Daniel to immediately step away to respond. In April 2023, during a period when Daniel was supposedly at a conference in Chicago, Sophia received an anonymous email containing photos of her husband entering a downtown Seattle apartment building with a woman. The timestamp on the images matched a video call during which Daniel had shown Sophia the view from his Chicago hotel room, clearly a pre-recorded video. When Daniel returned home, Sophia chose not to confront him immediately. Instead, she began a methodical investigation into her husband's double life, installing tracking software on their shared devices and hiring a private investigator. What she discovered went far beyond a simple affair. Over the next 3 months, Sophia uncovered a pattern of behavior that shattered her understanding of her marriage. Daniel wasn't involved with just one woman. The private investigator documented meetings with at least 4 different women across Seattle and Portland. But more disturbing than the infidelity itself were the conversations Sophia found in recovered message threads. In these exchanges, Daniel described himself as trapped in his marriage to Sophia. He referred to her as not a real woman and lamented to his lovers that he missed being with actual women. He spoke of plans to leave the marriage but claimed he feared Sophia would destroy his reputation in their professional community if he did. Most devastating was the discovery of a private social media account where Daniel connected with conservative-leaning groups, presenting himself as a man forced to live a politically correct life in Seattle's progressive tech world while secretly maintaining traditional values. He had cultivated an entirely separate identity in these spaces, one that fundamentally rejected Sophia's womanhood and portrayed himself as a victim. For Sophia, who had undergone years of painful physical and emotional transition before meeting Daniel, these revelations were cataclysmic. The man who had claimed to love her completely, who had seemed to embrace and celebrate all aspects of her identity, had been living a complex lie from the beginning. By July 2023, Sophia had compiled extensive evidence of Daniel's double life. Friends reported that she became withdrawn, losing weight, and taking leave from her business. She began seeing a therapist twice weekly and reached out to her estranged family for the first time in years. Those close to her believed she was preparing to file for divorce. What happened on the night of March 17, 2024, has been reconstructed through police reports, forensic evidence, and Sophia's own testimony. At approximately 7:30 p.m., Daniel returned home from what he claimed was a weekend business retreat. Sophia had prepared an elaborate dinner, opened an expensive bottle of wine, and set the dining room table with candles. According to cell phone records, she had spent the day sending normal, even affectionate messages to Daniel, giving no indication of what was to come. During dinner, Sophia methodically presented Daniel with evidence of his affairs, beginning with printed photographs and escalating to recordings of his most hurtful comments about her identity. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices around 9 p.m., though not loud enough to cause alarm in the spacious neighborhood where homes were set far apart. At 10:17 p.m., Sophia called 911, her voice described by the dispatcher as eerily calm. She reported that her husband had been stabbed and required medical assistance. When police arrived 7 minutes later, they found Daniel on the kitchen floor with multiple stab wounds to his chest and abdomen. A chef's knife from their wedding registry lay nearby. Despite paramedics' efforts, Daniel was pronounced dead at the scene. Sophia, still wearing a blood-stained evening dress, was sitting on the porch steps when officers arrived. She offered no resistance during her arrest, telling officers, "He said I wasn't real. I showed him what was real." The case against Sophia Reynolds moved rapidly through the legal system. Prosecutors charged her with second-degree murder, arguing the elaborate dinner setup demonstrated premeditation. Her defense team, led by prominent attorney Mira Hernandez, built a case around temporary insanity, citing the severe psychological trauma of Daniel's betrayal and the fundamental assault on Sophia's identity. The trial became a media sensation, drawing attention far beyond Seattle. Court proceedings revealed the full extent of Daniel's deception, including testimony from two of his lovers who confirmed his disparaging comments about Sophia and his misrepresentation of their marriage. Psychological experts testified about the unique damage caused by having one's gender identity, a core aspect of self that Sophia had fought hard to establish, systemically undermined by the person who publicly claimed to accept it most completely. Digital forensics uncovered that Daniel had been planning to leave Sophia for one of his girlfriends, having consulted with a divorce attorney about how to protect his assets and minimize any professional blowback. He had already secured a new apartment and begun moving personal items there in preparation. The jury deliberated for 4 days before returning with their verdict, guilty of manslaughter rather than murder, with a recommendation for leniency in sentencing. The judge, citing the extraordinary circumstances and evidence of Daniel's psychological abuse, sentenced Sophia to 8 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 5. Today, 3 months after sentencing, the Reynolds case continues to spark debate about relationships, identity, betrayal, and the limits of human endurance. The house on Lakeside Drive was sold, the proceeds frozen pending civil litigation from Daniel's family. Northwest Innovations established a workplace inclusion initiative, perhaps seeking to distance themselves from the revelations about their former executive's private beliefs. Sophia Reynolds, now inmate 8742991 at Washington Corrections Center for Women, has declined all interview requests. Her former business partner maintains Sophia's design firm with profits held in trust. The only public statement from Sophia came through her attorney after sentencing. "There are no winners here, only fragments of lives built on illusions." For those who study true crime, the Reynolds case presents a distinctly modern tragedy, one where the crime itself, while shocking, seems almost inevitable in retrospect. It raises uncomfortable questions about how well we know our partners and the devastating consequences when intimate trust is shattered. It forces us to consider what happens when a person discovers that their most vulnerable truth has been privately denied by the one person they believed had accepted it completely. As one juror anonymously told the Seattle Times after the trial, "None of us could say with certainty what we would have done in her position. That's what made this case so difficult. Where is the line between understandable human breaking and unforgivable human violence? I'm still not sure I know." The Reynolds case reminds us that the most dangerous deceptions often occur not between strangers, but between those who share their lives, their homes, and their most closely held truths. Sometimes the perfect facade is just that, a brittle surface concealing irreconcilable realities, waiting for the inevitable moment when everything shatters. For more interesting stories, check this out. Thank you for watching.